everyone, my name is Layla and I'm from Elevate Life, and I help people raise their vibration and their standards so that they can live a more joyful and empowered life. Today I want to talk to you about DNA activation and why it's so important. Firstly, what is DNA activation? That's the most common question I get asked because it sounds very woo-woo or very scientific, and actually it's a little bit of both. Firstly, if you were to think about a computer, right? You can't run a new software on an old computer. And this is the same with the new frequencies that are pulsating this earth at the moment. So if you think about 5D reality, there's a whole bunch of new frequencies coming in. It's impulsing our body. We're experiencing solar flares and all kinds of impulses. So there's a lot going on at the moment. And many of us are struggling with physical pain, with foggy brain, with feelings of desperation and depression, and not really knowing which way to turn. So activating one's DNA is equivalent to upgrading our computer system. We need to upgrade the hardware so that we can actually run the new software, so to speak. Now, it's probably not the best analogy, but for me, it's kind of like simple to explain it that way. DNA activation is essentially raising the vibration and the vibratory frequency of your cells within your physical body. So by raising your vibration, it means that you're going to be vibrating at a higher frequency, which means you can access the higher frequencies. Now, if we think of the energies on this earth at the moment, they're pretty dense and really heavy. Now, denser energies can be compared to drama and disease and disconnection and depression, and the much heavier energies. Whereas the lighter we are, the more higher our vibration, the more we're going to access the higher frequencies, which means we're going to be less engaged in the drama and we're going to be able to see things for what they are. Now, the benefits of DNA activation, of course, are like there's just so many of them. It's so fantastic. But you can, of course, experience much greater health benefits. You know, your body's going to process things a lot better. You're probably going to find that your diet's going to change a bit. You're not going to want to eat unhealthy or the heavier, denser foods. You're going to be more inclined to eat the higher vibratory foods. You're going to find that your emotional processing is faster. So you're not going to harp on things as much. You're going to be able to sort of see the drama that's coming, because let's face it, there are people in our lives that love drama. And if there isn't drama, they want to engage in drama. And the higher our vibration, the less we're going to want to engage in that sort of energy. So we're going to be able to see, you know, the wood from the trees and be able to sort of pull away from that kind of energy, and most likely even detox people out of our lives as well. We're going to find that there's going to be increased brain functioning. So you're going to be able to process faster. You're going to understand bigger concepts a lot better. And then, of course, there's a spiritual side of DNA activation as well, because if you're vibrating at a higher frequency, you're going to be able to access not only more of your own soul and your higher self energy, but also you're going to be able to connect more with the healing frequencies out there. You're going to understand those concepts, as I mentioned earlier, you know, just be able to have much more aha moments. And of course, our spiritual gifts start to activate as well. So I had my DNA activated in, 1997 is when I had my DNA activated. And I just remember opening really quickly after that. But that's not the case for everybody. My spiritual abilities really started to become enhanced, and I started to definitely pick up more of the telepathy side of things. My psychic abilities increased, and then of course my healing abilities opened. But this doesn't happen with everybody as quickly as it did for me. What people have reported is that their senses are definitely heightened. They're able to process information a lot faster. They find that their bodies feel a lot lighter, that they don't get sick as much. Antibodies in the body are definitely activated as well. And DNA activation is just so fantastic, because during the sessions that I do with you, we access all kinds of things in the DNA. So I do my sessions online and remotely just because of lockdown, but I am happy to do them in person. But a lot of my clientele are internationals, and it works absolutely fine over Zoom. And what it is my energy body basically enters into your space, and I start to work with your energy fields, and then of course go into the body. So with DNA, it's in our cells. So I do like an etheric incision at the back of your neck to expose 12 energy points along your spine. Those energy points are called codons. And by channeling energy directly into those codons, the energy goes down into your body and, of course, starts to move through the entire body and increase the vibration. Now, when we get to the DNA part, this is really exciting because we understand that DNA holds the history or the full library, all that information from our ancestors. And anything that your ancestors would have experienced, whether it have been geological or biological, any diseases or sicknesses that they may have had, picking up like radiation from certain areas in the world during world wars, it will still be sitting in the DNA. So during the DNA activation, it is possible to do an ancestral clearing of all of that negative coding. Now, they have done studies where they've shown and proven that DNA holds trauma as well. So they've experimented on mice, and because mice can replicate really quickly, they've done experiments on mice where they've basically traumatized the one batch of mice and then allowed them to reproduce, and they've reproduced for 5 generations without any trauma. And then that last generation, they've basically created the trauma again. It was either a sound or some shock therapy, minor shock therapy, or a smell that was linked to the trauma. And it showed that those little mice that have never experienced trauma and neither have their 4 generations before immediately activated the trauma. So we carry trauma in our DNA, and it is possible to clear this trauma. And this is also where we tie into the sins of our forefathers, so to speak. Let's say, for example, during war, maybe one of our ancestors had to kill somebody or had to go to war and obviously shoot the opposition. Or, there was maybe like we had to steal food because there was famine. There would be trauma associated with that. There'd be shame or guilt or fear or anger. And those are all packets of information that sit in the DNA that can now be cleared. And a lot of that processing might not have been processed by your ancestors. So now it's sitting in your DNA waiting for you to process it. And this is where the sins of the forefathers comes in. But let's face it, in this lifetime, you've got enough on your plate to now have to worry about dealing with your ancestor stuff as well. So it's one of the first things that I do in DNA activation is to actually release that ancestral karmic debt and release the trauma so that you can start fresh. And because you share DNA with your immediate family members, anything that happens to your DNA is going to affect them too. So not only are you releasing your ancestors of that negative trauma and those negative packets of information and energy, but you're also freeing your children and your future generations as well. So it's a great service to do. So if you're going to do DNA activation, don't do it just for you, do it for your family too. Then we go in and we have a look at like disease, because disease is sitting in the DNA like packets of information, right? Like coding. So with my gift where I'm able to see the DNA, I will talk you through visualization of what I'm doing so that you can assist with this DNA activation and start to identify the coding for certain diseases that might be plaguing your family genetically and start to basically switch them off. So it's brilliant. It's very much like, the way I see it is very much like binary code. So there's zeros and ones. I see the packets of information, and it really is just about disengaging it or switching it off and then switching on the coding for excellent health, youthfulness, and vitality. Now, in the body, we know that the cells regenerate every 7 years, which means every single cell in our body will regenerate every 7 years. Not all at the same time, but it stands to reason that our body should basically regenerate every 7 years and, number one, not age and not start to break down. But because of the coding in our body, we've got that coding for, degeneration, for aging, for illness. So it's like, compared to doing a photocopy of a photocopy, eventually the final photocopy is going to be terrible. And this is why I always like reinstate the original divine blueprint in the DNA so that you have the original coding, which is still sitting in your DNA. It's just not activated. It's been switched off. And there's a whole big backstory to why our DNA and certain codes have actually been switched off. And it has to do with the gods that rule this planet and the master geneticists that basically took out 12 strands of DNA and split them up like a fiber optic cable and only put 2 of the strands back together that allowed humans to be more controlled and manipulated. So we became the slave species of God. And if you haven't read those books, I suggest you go and read them. So look up Zachariah Zitchin and look up Michael Tellinger. Brilliant, brilliant work on the DNA and why it is that we only have 2 strands of DNA activated. So with the DNA activation and increasing that vibratory frequency, the magnetic field around the DNA strands also increases. And what happened to those other 10 strands of DNA? Well, they're still there. They're just sitting there interdimensionally, which means that as you increase your vibration, so you start to access those other strands of DNA. So this is why our children that are coming in these days are carrying a higher vibration, which means they're already 3, sometimes 4 strand activated already. And people that have been activated, they start to, like I can see the DNA activating, and there's 4, 5, 6 strands already like starting to activate, and obviously more the higher the vibration goes, which is very exciting. And already there are articles being released that they are finding additional strands of DNA, which is super, super exciting. So we're seeing the results in the physical, and I love doing work with a geneticist up in Johannesburg as well, where we got to test the DNA and see the before and after effects and how the DNA was behaving. But DNA really is a phenomenal, phenomenal piece of us that's inside that carries so much coding and information. It carries all the genetics and the coding for all talents and abilities that will be sitting in your DNA. So with me, for example, I used to be extremely shy. I couldn't even speak to 2 people, let alone a room of people. So I knew I had to do something to activate like public speaking or, courage on stage. So what I did was I went into my DNA and I saw that like one of my ancestors basically had that talent for public speaking. I think it was a politician or something. So I found that coding and I activated it, which really had a drastic effect on my life. But the thing with DNA is it's not just physical DNA, it's also spiritual DNA, which means that your soul, in a sense, has DNA too. So the energetic imprint from any of your previous life experiences is also sitting in your DNA. So you can activate previous life spiritual abilities too. So that's what I did. Like in a previous life, I used to work with the DNA, and I'm a star being, a star seed. So I used to love all of that, the coding and the DNA and creating universes and that sort of like energy of like structuring things. So for me, the DNA makes perfect sense and I absolutely love it. And what I have found is that as the DNA is being activated, the frequency and the sound changes. So when I go into a person's body, I can see the different codes. Like I can see the light activation codes and like what some of the talents might be. And just by sending the energy in there and waking it up, people's abilities start to awaken. So you can do that for physical talents and abilities. Like let's say you want to be a better painter. We can have a look in your DNA and see if that coding is sitting there and just activate it. So you don't need to go through like a whole like training process. If it's already sitting in your DNA, just activate it. Because in this day and age, time is not really on our side. Who can like go and study for 3 years to master something? If it's in your DNA, unlock it and access it. The same with your spiritual abilities. We all have healing abilities inside us. We are all psychic. We just weren't taught how to use it. But if it's there, you can activate it. So DNA activation is a very, very exciting empowerment tool, and I really encourage you to investigate it further, because if we're going to raise the vibration and frequency on this planet, we need to activate our DNA. If you want to find out more about DNA activation, you can visit my website, elevatelife.co.za. That's ELEV number 8, life.co.za. And you can visit my booking site. The booking link is in the website, and I'll put the link below as well. And just know that for South Africans, I know the economy is really shocking at the moment, so of course I'm going to offer my South Africans a discount, but even still my rates are really, really good. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. Give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribe to my channel for more videos.